Welcome everyone to RC lesson number 10. Today we will be discussing yet another refinement approach, whatever you want to call it, to structural reading. This is based on an explanation that I gave to one of my students recently, and I thought it was broad enough as I was kind of doing the lesson follow-up that I'd put it out here for you guys to take a look at too. So we will be doing this in the context of two passages, passage number 1 and passage number 3 from PT 58, section 2. So the objectives for today. This is really designed for people that if you're feeling like you're missing the logic or the structure when you're trying to simplify what you're reading. So you've taken my advice or other people's advice where you're trying not to get too mired into details. You're also trying to grasp the logic and the structure of the passage, but it's just not happening that you're missing it. I'm going to offer some guidelines that might help you grasp that structure that you're missing. So the guidelines are as follows. When reading the first and last sentence of each paragraph, try to be sensitive to comparison ideas. So are they saying that idea X and idea Y, whatever they are somehow similar or analogous? Contrast when they are actually doing the opposite and they are distinguishing X and Y from each other in some way. Or attribution in terms of is it the author saying something? Who is saying what really? And finally, segmentation. Is the big complex idea or sentence that you're looking at, is it actually divisible into simpler ideas, X and Y? So while the above four things are not necessarily a comprehensive list of all the possible ways an RC passage can do things, the segmentation is a nice catch-all way to cut through the superficial complexity of the passage, and as a result, I think most passages should be completely covered by the above four ideas. Obviously, there will be outliers. There will be some passages that are just hard, terrible, difficult, evil, whatever you want to call it. But the vast majority of things, I think, this will provide you a good framework to do. So let's get right into it. So the first passage of PT 58, section 2, starting with paragraph number 1, the first sentence. Traditional sources of evidence about ancient history are archaeological remains and surviving texts. Detail-wise, this is kind of a nothing burger to me. None of this seems like news. To learn about old stuff, we have usually resorted to digging up old stuff and reading old stuff. And in other news, water is wet. Like, I don't really know why anybody would care enough to write about this. But there is a potential contrast here. The use of the word traditional to me strongly suggests that the passage might be concerned with discussing a non traditional approach of some kind for some reason. I don't know why, but maybe that's what they're doing. At the very least, the passage might be interested in discussing something not so great about the traditional approach, and even if we don't want to get so negative, maybe a non traditional approach is just better, even if the old one was fine. Something like that, a potential contrast. I feel like there's one on the horizon. Lo and behold, the last sentence of paragraph 1 kind of indicates this. Yet, despite these obstacles, researchers have learned a great deal about how to piece together a whole picture from many disparate sources of evidence. So, to me, that's a bingo. Apparently, there were obstacles involved with the traditional way of doing things, but people, specifically people studying ancient textiles, found ways around them. Putting this together with the first sentence that we just read, paragraph 1 probably contains some description of obstacles, especially when it comes to studying ancient textiles. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but since that's what the last sentence mentioned, that's a guess that I have. And the following paragraphs will discuss how the textile studiers got around said obstacles. So I want to highlight here that this is not rocket science. There's no hidden comprehension magic here. All I did was take a longish sentence and identify two parts to it. There were obstacles, and then textile studiers got past those obstacles. That's it. Every single one of you is likely literate enough to do this. You can look at this last sentence and find these two ideas. And then from there, it's not a huge stretch to guess that paragraph 1, at least the rest of it that I skipped, is the first idea that there were obstacles. And the remainder of the passage will likely have something to do with idea 2, which is the how the textile studiers got past these various obstacles. So pushing into paragraph 2 now, if we're all ready. The first sentence basically boils down to a segmentation idea. The first piece of it is that tech advances in archaeology let us get more information from old stuff than we used to be able to. And the second idea here is that these tech advances specifically help us get more information from minute remains. So the identification of ideas X and Y might not actually matter all that much in the grand scheme of things, but at least I'm walking away with the sense that the minuteness of remains might have been an obstacle before the technology advanced past that point. Moving down to the last sentence, this is how two folks found literally the oldest shirt ever in an ancient laundry pile. So I'm kind of at a loss here. I'm not seeing anything specifically from the four list of guidelines that I had for this presentation that neatly describes this factoid. I guess what I'm about to do is a form segmentation, but naming what I'm doing isn't the most important thing. And if you follow my content, it never really is. So what am I getting at? It's the only real clue about the logical significance of this sentence is the first word thus. So this signals that whatever came before it, which is the middle part of paragraph two that I skipped, describes the reasons why these two scholars were able to identify the artifact. And those reasons, probably based on the first sentence of this paragraph, have something to do with technology advances. So pushing into paragraph three now. The first sentence provides a clue of contrast here. Recreating the actual production of cloth is presented as something different than whatever it was about tech advancements that we skipped from paragraph two. The last sentence also provides another contrast. It's kind of like the super old shirt thing from the end of paragraph two. The details of this sentence, statues and dresses, don't seem inherently interesting on a logical level to me. I don't really know why we should care about that logically speaking. However, the first word of the last sentence is but, meaning that whatever came just before the sentence in paragraph three suggested something other than what was ascertained in this sentence. So I'm not really sure where to go from that, but I just know that whatever it is, if I'm researching paragraph three, that the stuff that came before the last sentence seems to suggest something other than what the last sentence actually tells us. And so without dwelling on, because the purpose of this isn't for me to like fully demonstrate a passage, I just really want to keep the focus on the how the guidelines work. I'm just going to push right into passage three from this same prep test, the same section. So pushing into passage three now, starting with the first paragraph. The first sentence of this one gives us an attribution clue to begin with. Supporters, that's what the word proponents in that sentence means. Supporters of tangible object theory say that thing X, copyright and similar IP rights, are an extension, arguably, of thing Y, which I would call the right to own concrete tangible objects. So yeah, there's multiple things going on, attribution and segmentation here. So really, to uncomplicate the concepts, they're basically saying that X is taking the same concepts from Y and applying them to a different area. That's what these proponents are saying. The last sentence offers us a comparison, most likely. Um, again, like the super old shirt thing and the statue dress things from the previous passage. The details of this sentence, which have to do with the transference of object ownership, that doesn't seem inherently interesting to me on a logical level. Again, I'm not exactly sure why it's there and what it's doing there. My best guess is that this factoid is listed here as one way that X is like Y. And again, that's just based on my interpretation of the first sentence. The first sentence has a bunch of people saying, hey, thing X is like thing Y, and then we just get a factoid without any other clues as to why it's there. Then that's just my best guess that this factoid here has been included because it helps advance the discussion or support the idea that thing X is in fact like thing Y. And honestly, I am not particularly sure about what I skipped in paragraph one or where this is going, but really I'm okay with that. I'm satisfied at this point with merely knowing that a group of people out there think that X is a logical extension of Y, and that the rest of the passage is going to elaborate on, support, or challenge this concept. Perhaps all three, perhaps maybe yet a fourth different one. Who knows and who really cares? I just know that's probably what this is going to be about. I don't know exactly what direction they're going to go, but that doesn't really scare me. So moving right along to paragraph two. The first sentence, there's some segmentation going on here. Turns out when you make an object, you own that object and you get all the rights associated with owning that object, whatever they are. Again, there's nothing super groundbreaking here. I just separated and simplified two ideas in an otherwise somewhat complicated looking sentence. But that's really what all this boils down to. There, if you break it into two parts, this is what you get. The last sentence gives us segmentation and a little bit of contrast as well. So some rights are retained by the original owner of an object, include a bunch of stuff that I didn't even bother to finish reading. I literally just gave up reading halfway through this part of the sentence. The contrast, though, comes from the fact that this sentence seems to be talking about something different than the first sentence. So the first sentence was when you make an object, you own the object plus the rights attached to it. This last sentence that we just read This is talking about an entirely different sounding thing to me. The original owner of an object gets to retain some rights, suggesting that this sentence is a discussion of what happens when ownership is transferred. So, like, even if you give the thing away, you get to keep some rights associated with that thing. That's what it seems to be saying. Because they're talking about original owner, then there must be a new or not original owner involved, right? So that's where this transference idea to me is coming from. So piecing together a logical progression from paragraph 1 to paragraph 2 now with all this data. The end of paragraph 1 mentions transferring ownership, and the end of paragraph 2 suggests that paragraph 2 was indeed discussing what happens when transferring ownership. So remember that I didn't have any particular thoughts about the significance of the ownership transfer concept after reading paragraph 1, because that's the first place where it showed up. So I didn't really make a note of that. But the last sentence tells me that paragraph 2 tells me that it was apparently important enough to keep discussing throughout the entirety of paragraph 2. So that's a hint for me. So maybe paragraph 3 will continue discussing matters related to transferring ownership. I'm not sure. And again, this is just simply because I didn't really register anything particularly important about transferring ownership as a concept when I finished paragraph 1. But by the time I finished paragraph 2, I realized that, hey, it seems like paragraph 2 actually kind of continued the discussion where paragraph 1 dropped off about ownership. So I guess transferring ownership is a thing that this passage cares about. I don't know if I'd call it the main purpose just yet, but it seems like there's a good chance that paragraph 3 is going to continue discussing it. But then again, I could be wrong, but that doesn't really bother me. I just have a guess as to where this is going, and if it turns out different, it turns out different. That's why we actually have to kind of read the thing, right? So moving on now to the third and final paragraph of passage 3 here. Paragraph number 3. The first sentence gives us an opportunity to try both attribution and contrast here. So again, supporters of the tangible object theory are saying that tangible object theory is cool because it allows us to avoid using the problematic supposition that one can own abstract stuff like ideas. So yeah, tangible object theory says that X is cool because it allows us to avoid Y. That's what it boils down to. The last sentence only offers us sort of the catch-all segmentation again. In whatever example that I didn't read in the middle of paragraph 3, the friend is the creator of the intangible object, whatever that was from the example. The poet apparently has no ground for claiming copyright on an object unless the poet can claim to own the ideas that are expressed in the work, and the work here presumably refers to whatever it was that the friend person made. So there's three things to unpack from this rather long sentence here. The friend created the object. The poet has no copyright on it, unless the poet can claim to own the ideas that are expressed therein. So this is weird to me. I sense a contrast between the first and the last sentences, and this is where I'm getting it from. So the first sentence was about the tangible object theory, allowing us to avoid the problematic concept of owning ideas, right? Again, remember first sentence, the supporters of the tangible object theory think X, the theory, is cool because it allows us to avoid Y, which is the owning ideas concept. So that's why that was where the paragraph started. But the last sentence to me, um, the last sentence's suggested use of that, quote unquote, problematic owning ideas concept doesn't actually seem all that problematic. It doesn't seem immediately objectionable to me. It seems actually kind of okay. So, I mean, it sounds like the poet actually wrote a poem. I'm just speculating here because I didn't actually read the example, but I don't really see any other way to guess about it. It sounds like the poet actually wrote a poem, and then the friend did something with that poem, made something else out of that very same poem. It doesn't seem bad to me at all that the poet should have some level of control over the poem they wrote, which owning ideas apparently allows. So maybe this is an indication to me that the author uses paragraph 3 to show a deficiency of the tangible object theory. And those of you who read the entire paragraph will know that this is in fact the case. But yeah, this is perhaps a little bit more subtle than the slide might give it credit for, but this again kind of relates to something else that I've been talking about, which is your feelings. I just felt like it seemed right that a poet should have some copyright over um, their poem, right? They did write it, presumably, um, and so I mean, yeah, I mean, it just didn't seem like a quote problematic idea that the poet would use, owning the ideas to claim copyright over a work that used their poem. It's just that somebody else physically made whatever it was that contains the poem. Like that doesn't seem like a bad idea to me compared to how bad that idea was presented as in the first sentence, and that was where I'm getting the contrast from. So yeah, and again, those of you who read the paragraph will know that that's in fact where the paragraph went. But I just want to show that you can get all that information from just the first and the last sentence if you are keyed into the idea of contrast. And so, of course, we have that as that's kind of the end of all I wanted to cover today. So, our takeaways for today that if you're missing the logic and structure when you're trying to read simply and faster and more effectively, when you're reading the first and last sentence of each paragraph, be sensitive to comparisons, contrasts, attributions, and segmentation. In particular, segmentation I want to emphasize as a good catch-all for you when the other three things list don't help. And as you will obviously note, I did not do the questions for these passages. The point of today's lesson was just to highlight how to read a passage, which will ideally result in you guys being able to map out a passage more effectively, so you'll know where to research questions and how to interpret that research correctly. Again, that's kind of the overarching goal of structural reading. That's what structural reading will allow you to do. Not only will you be able to move faster, generally speaking, through a passage, when you do research for a question, you'll actually interpret the research that you're doing properly. And if you do happen to have trouble with any of the questions from these passages, feel free to email me about them. And my email address is provided on the next and final slide. You guys have reached the end. Thanks for being here. As always, leave a comment if you have questions, or as more of you opt to do, email me directly at the email address provided here. And as always, I will see you guys in the next one.